Hello everyone and welcome to PSYCO 282, Behavior Modification. I'm your instructor, Dr. Kimberly Campbell, and today's video is meant to be a stand-in for our standard first lecture of class. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, why I'm here teaching this class, who I am, and then we're going to move on and go through some of the highlights of our syllabus, give you an idea of what to expect for the course, how we're going to format things so that you know what to expect for the rest of the semester. Now that I've established myself as a real living, breathing human being and not just some disembodied voice on top of the video, let's hop over to the PowerPoint slides. And as promised, the first part of this video is going to be all about getting to know your instructor, which is me. So, like I said, I am Dr. Kimberly Campbell. You can call me Dr. Campbell, or I'm okay with just Kimberly. I'm fairly new to having that degree, so I'm not super attached to the title as of yet. Before I launch into my academic background, I always like to explain why I cover this. When you're learning about science and when you're going through these courses, we always try and stress that it's important to be critical of your sources. Where's this information coming from? And I am, even as an instructor, then a source. So who am I to sit here and tell you about all of these science things? So when I'm giving you my academic background, I'm not just showing off my list of degrees. I'm actually telling you why I'm a credible reference, why I'm a credible source to be sharing this information with you, even if most of it is coming from a textbook. So with that little caveat out of the way, the basic summary of my academic background is that I got my Bachelor of Science from Dalhousie University. That's in Halifax, Nova Scotia, for those not familiar with the institution. I did that back in 2013. And it's interesting to note that my BSc actually wasn't in psychology. I started off in physics, realized I was not fantastic at mathematics, and swapped over to bio. So I'm actually a bio major. And I'll talk about some of the research I've done in that biology field in just a moment here. But continuing with academics, I got my Master's of Science here at the University of Alberta in 2015. I did that with the Songbird Neuroethology Lab on campus. So if you're familiar with Dr. Sturdy in the department, I worked with him for my master's, and I continued on to get my Doctor of Philosophy, my PhD, still at the University of Alberta. So I got that in 2019. So like I said, fairly recently. Now, a new addition that I've been including with this whole switch to online thing is a little bit about me as a person. I find it's a little bit challenging, I guess, to get a feel for people when we're doing this online thing. It is, as I said, very easy for me to come across as just this disembodied voice that you hear. But I am, in fact, a person. So a little bit about me outside of academia. I am an avid bird lover. I have 2 pet birds. I have studied birds. I love birds. So I try to keep the bird examples to a minimum, but they will pop up fairly often as I teach. I am a chocolate fanatic. That is one of my favorite things to eat, even if it isn't very healthy. I like to think of myself as an amateur photographer, sort of an easier way to have an artistic output. I used to do drawing and painting, but that takes up far more time than I can afford, especially when I was a grad student. I have been obsessed with the Pokemon games since I was younger, and I continue to play those to this day. And finally, I am a collector of hobbies. So whenever I have free time, I like to pick up random hobbies. So I sew, I knit, I crochet, I cross-stitch. I've tried sculpture, all sorts of different things. I like to try different activities and see what I enjoy. So that's me outside of academia. Again, just to give you a feel for who it is that you're listening to. But hopping back to some of the more, I guess, relevant information, as promised, I'm going to give you a bit of my research background. So, like I said, when I was an undergraduate, I was in biology and I was focusing a lot on genetics and evolution. So, my research as an honors student in an undergraduate lab, I ended up doing a lot of sequencing of DNA, and I was trying to identify different species of single celled organisms in soil samples, which is just as exciting as it sounds. So I'm very familiar with things like PCR and designing primers and evaluating the outcomes of gels that you've run your PCR on and all of that thrilling stuff if you've ever taken a molecular bio course. From there, I actually turned in a pretty abrupt different direction and switched over to psychology. Again, because of my love of birds. So I ended up studying learning and communication in black-capped chickadees. So I've done things like operant conditioning experiments to figure out what chickadees think of different sounds. How do they categorize sounds? I've done bioacoustic investigations of their vocalizations, so seeing how different types of vocalizations differ structurally, and stuff like that. So some of my expertise will kind of shine through throughout this course because there's quite a bit of overlap with different topics in the class and stuff that I've actually done hands-on, which is kind of cool and hopefully helpful for you guys as well. And one more picture of birds. Another thing I've included with this switch to online learning is, as I mentioned, I have two pet birds. I lovingly call them my research assistants. I have Link on the left and Chic on the right, green cheek conure and sun conure, respectively. And this isn't just an excuse to share cute bird photos, though we can always use more cute bird photos. I just want to give everyone a heads up that I have these guys and I work from home. So sometimes they will make appearances in the videos despite my best efforts. So if you hear stuff in the background, sometimes it's these guys. I just like to let people know in case you're wondering, what the heck is that weird sound? It's usually birds. So it's just one of the limitations or maybe bonuses of working from home. And then the last part about me as an instructor is I want to talk a little bit about my teaching philosophy. And this is one of those sections that as a student, I never understood why instructors would include this. But now that I'm sort of getting a feel for being an instructor myself, and as I'm getting comfortable talking to students, I feel really strongly about telling you why I teach the way that I teach. I feel like it's going to be a lot more informative, and you're going to know where I'm coming from if I actually tell you why I'm doing stuff the way I'm doing it. So that's what this section is. The first is a big disclaimer that online learning is still fairly new and it's very different from everything that we're used to. So I am aware that as students, this is not what you were expecting to be doing in university. This is very different and very far from what we were expecting to be in a classroom and to have that kind of personal interaction. And as an instructor, this is a lot different than what I'm used to. I'm used to standing in front of a room and talking to students and seeing your faces to know if the information is hitting just right. But instead, I'm sitting at my computer desk by myself. So everything is very different, and I am aware and expecting there to be quite a learning curve. With every class that I'm running, I'm learning new things and I'm adapting to online learning. And hopefully by now I've kind of ironed out the potential issues, but stuff may go wrong and we're just going to have to be adaptive. So I'm going to be aware that you guys are adapting to something new, and I just hope that you can be aware that I'm adapting as well. My next point is the idea that material should be accessible. So you may have noticed by now that I have possibly the most boring slides on the history of slides. And this isn't just because I'm lazy. This is actually because in one of the first classes that I taught, I had a student who was colorblind. And they had pointed out that a lot of the figures and slides that are included with textbooks aren't colorblind friendly. And since then, I've encountered students with other kinds of learning disabilities or even just preferences. And I've found that having nice, clean slides, white with black text, having figures that aren't going to be impossible for people with different kinds of visual disabilities to see, just sort of making stuff visible and accessible to as many people as possible. So, yes, my slides are very boring, but they're boring for a reason. So hopefully you can forgive that. And you'll notice that as we go through, a lot of my figures have been adjusted for high contrast or things like that. And that's the same reason, to make them accessible. On that note, if there's anything that you think of that could help make these slides or make my materials more accessible, I would love to hear that, because I'm very new to this teaching thing. I've only been doing this for a couple of years, so I'm always open to new ways and better ways to set things up, because I'm here to teach you guys, and I want to make sure it's available to you. And on that note of making things available, my last philosophy or my last idea around teaching is that I want you guys to make use of as many resources as possible. I'm going to make lots of stuff available, and it's up to you to come and make use of that. So come to our weekly office hours or weekly Zoom classes where you can chat with myself and other students, ask questions, talk about cool topics from the class, or even talk about science in general. You don't have to attend, and we'll get into that in a minute. But if you are sort of free and want to come by, it's a great resource. I also share videos and extra links. I make a point to tell you that things are just for interest's sake, but I like to include extra stuff because seeing other examples and extra videos and different perspectives really helps you learn material better. And our last resource is your instructor and your TA. So don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or our TA Connor. Send us an email, set up office hours, set up meetings outside of office hours, or come to those office hours. But make use of us. We're a resource and we're here to help you. So that is my teaching philosophy in a nutshell. The next section is all about introducing you to the course. So effectively, I'm going to be hitting some of the high points from the syllabus. That doesn't mean that you can get away with not reading the syllabus. Please make sure that you at least flip through the document. At this point in your academic careers, you have for sure seen multiple syllabi, but it's always a good idea to take a look at it. That document is going to be effectively our contract for the course. So that's where you're going to go to look for things like due dates or deadlines or extra information about where you can find things or stuff like that. So it's a pretty good resource. Make sure you have it handy. And you can find that syllabus on eClass. So if you need a copy, you can go download it there. But I'm going to hit sort of the important points of that here. So I just mentioned that you can find the syllabus on eClass. And in fact, eClass is going to be our main source of information for the course. That's going to be the central hub where you can find everything else that you're going to need for this class. And if it isn't located directly on eClass, it's going to be linked through eClass. So that's where you can go to find general information, things like the syllabus, our announcements, and the frequently asked questions section. So as I get emails, if I see multiple students asking the same question, I'll add that question to our frequently asked questions section so that everybody can know the answer. The announcements for the course, I'm going to talk about sort of upcoming dates or information that I think that you should need. Those announcements will show up on eClass, but they will also send a copy to your U of A email, so make sure that you're checking that email address. On eClass, on eClass, you're also going to find resources for all of our course assessments. Things like practice questions for exams or information about assignments. All of that's going to be on eClass, organized, hopefully, in some pretty logical different sections. eClass is also going to include links to our examinations, and I'll talk about our exams in just a couple of minutes. eClass is also where you can find our lecture videos and slides. It seems kind of weird to state that here because you would have had to find this video on eClass to watch it right now, but that's where all of our lecture videos and slides are going to be posted. On the topic of lectures, our lectures are going to be done asynchronously, basically meaning that I'm not doing live lectures. I'm going to be doing pre-recorded lectures. I'm going to post them on YouTube and include links to those YouTube videos on eClass. So if you want, you can just bookmark our YouTube channel and sort of watch through the playlist there, or you can click on each individual video link on our eClass. Both are going to get you to the same material. And for timing, I'm going to aim to have them up at least in time for the lecture that day. Okay, let me see if I can say that more clearly. So our Tuesday classes are supposed to, on paper, start at 8 a.m. Because I'm not actually doing live lectures, the time doesn't really matter, but I'm going to post what I would have taught in that Tuesday at 8 a.m. class online so that you can access it by that time. You don't have to watch it at that specific moment in time. I'm just sort of setting myself a deadline to aim for so that if you wanted to watch our lectures as they would be presented if we were doing them in person, so within that specific time they're intended for, then you can do so. But there's nothing stopping you from watching it later that day or the day after or whenever. So that's one of the joys of asynchronous lectures is you can watch these lectures whenever you want, multiple times, speed them up, slow them down, all those extra functions you get from YouTube, including their generated subtitles and everything. So it's a pretty good way to access that information. The slides are going to be posted on eClass as well. I'm going to post them as both PowerPoint and PDF files. I found that some students like PowerPoint, some students like PDFs, so I'm going to give you both, and hopefully one of those works for you. Now, as I mentioned, we're not having live lectures, but I don't want you guys to miss out on the opportunity to actually interact with people and your instructor live. That's one of the things that I most miss of having actual in-person classes is that interaction. And so I've found a good alternative for that is that during what would be our Tuesday lectures, that Tuesday at 8 a.m., I'm going to hold Zoom meetings. These are completely optional. You don't have to attend, but for those of you who feel like me and miss interacting with regular human beings, you can attend these meetings, you can ask questions, you can discuss course topics, or just chat about science in general. They're going to be very laid back, not very structured. You can show up, you can have your video on or off. I will automatically mute mics at the beginning, but if you want to ask a question, you can unmute yourself to ask a question. If you're not comfortable chatting, you can type it into the chat box, and you can send it to the whole class, or you can send it to just me. It's all very, very flexible, and again, very laid back. So the link to those Zoom classes can be found on eClass in the live meetings section. All the instructions for how those work are there. But yeah, feel free to attend, but you don't have to. And I have this note about a 15-minute minimum because sometimes people don't have a lot of questions, especially the class right after a midterm. People don't have any questions because they haven't learned any new stuff yet anyways. So sometimes we'll sit there for 15 minutes, people will have one or two questions, and then we're done. I don't want us to have to sit around for a long period of time. So I write it in that I'm going to stick around for at least 15 minutes. So if you can't come right at the beginning, I will be there for at least 15 minutes. But after that time, then I can leave if nobody has any other questions. So just giving us that opportunity to meet without keeping me stuck in a Zoom meeting I've had ones that last up to an hour with nobody showing up. So I'm learning with this online thing. All right, so that's kind of where you can find stuff and the format for lectures and office hours/meetings. So let's talk about the course itself. So the course description that comes from the course catalog says that this is a study of applications of learning principles and laboratory findings to behavior problems in educational, clinical, and societal settings, specifically with emphasis on empirical research demonstrating the effectiveness of behavior modification and cognitive behavioral techniques. Um, so that's a lot of words, but basically we're looking at learning, principles of learning, and how we can apply those, how we can start changing behaviors. Mostly we're going to look at things like trying to fix problem behaviors, but not always. We're going to get into things like how do we learn and how can we change how we learn and what mechanisms are driving those learning processes. And of course, we're also going to look at a lot of empirical research. So what kinds of studies have been done? How can we even study learning, especially in non-human animals? So it's going to be a really interesting class. I absolutely love this topic, so I'm really excited to share that with you guys. But when we talk about goals for the course, the things that we want to focus on learning about, as I said, we're looking at these basic principles of behavior modification. So we're going to break it down and look at things like operant and classical conditioning, shaping, stimulus control, reinforcement and punishment, and everything in between. This class covers a lot of material, and we're going to cover it fairly quickly, but I find it to be very interesting material, which will help a lot with learning it. And as I said, we're going to look at how we study these topics and also how we can apply them. So not only how is the research conducted, but what can we do with that research once we have it? How can we apply it to the real world? So lots of cool stuff to look forward to. Our textbook, this is the citation for our textbook and a picture of the cover so that you know what you're looking for. You can get a hard copy, you can get an e-copy, you can buy a used copy if you want. I've had a couple of people ask if they can use older editions, and the answer is that's going to be up to your discretion. I've never actually used an older version of this textbook, so I don't know how much difference there is between the 5th and the 6th edition. So you could buy an older textbook, but just be aware that the material might not be exactly the same. So do so at your own risk, but I don't have anything against it. All right, so next, this is straight out of our syllabus. This is just our lecture schedule and the readings that go along with that. So I've broken it down by week, weeks 1 through 14. We have reading week coming up fairly soon, which is lovely. Something to look forward to, I suppose. And just a breakdown of all the topics we're going to cover and the chapters we're going to cover. So you'll notice that for this first week, we're covering 3 chapters. But you may also have noticed that none of those are up on eClass yet. And that's because I want to give students a chance to familiarize themselves with the course format, watch this video, read the syllabus, go through our eClass and see where stuff is sort of sorted out. And then we're going to start with actual real lecture material starting on Thursday. So today is kind of a free day where we're just getting comfortable with the class and getting to know where things are at. And then we'll get into actual lectures starting next class on Thursday. And fortunately, I double checked. The first 3 chapters are very, very short. There's going to be quite a bit of review and just sort of reminding you of some relevant terms, so it shouldn't be too intense. And I'll be keeping our lectures to about as long as the classes would be running, so I'm not going to be throwing extra long videos at you or anything like that. But yeah, so this is our roadmap for the course. There's a note up here saying that this is meant to be a guideline and it may change as the course progresses. That's just there in case something takes longer than I thought it would. Again, online learning is a little bit different from in-person learning, and it's very hard to judge how long stuff's going to take. So, yeah, this might be a little bit flexible, but if something has to change, I'll make sure that you know about it. I'll make announcements about it. We'll stay on top of that. All right. Another note down here at the bottom. There's a note that we will not be covering chapters 12 or 23. I find that those are highly specific chapters and they're really only relevant for sort of clinical type stuff. So I'm skipping over them. You can read them if you're interested in that. But we're covering 23 chapters, so cutting those two out was a really good idea in my mind. All right. Now we're getting into the stuff that you probably really care about, and this is our grade evaluation. So how are you going to earn grades for this class? And again, this is straight from our syllabus, but we're going to have 2 midterms, a final exam, 2 assignments, and a whole bunch of chapter quizzes. So this is our basic roadmap here, and I'm going to talk about each component individually. So let's start with our written assignments. Like I said, there's going to be 2 of them. The first is going to be due Friday, February 5th. Second is due Friday, March 12th. And you'll notice that most of our deadlines are going to be sort of 11:59 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, which is Edmonton time. So this is effectively midnight on whatever date that's there. I always encourage students to submit much earlier than that. I also encourage you to make note of what Mountain Standard Time is for you if you're not in the Edmonton area. Just again, with online learning, there's lots of different ways for things to go wrong. But these assignments are going to be effectively take-home examinations. So I'm going to be asking you questions that are based on the lecture topics that we've covered up to that point, and you're going to work through those questions and hand them in. So this is meant to be a way to test you on sort of written questions, but without a time crunch. So I'm going to release these assignments 2 weeks before their respective due dates. So 2 weeks before February 5th, and then another one 2 weeks before March 12th, so that you have 2 weeks to work on them, and you can sort of take your time and work on them at your leisure. So don't worry about those quite yet, but as soon as they're going to be released on eClass, I'll make sure I give you an announcement so that you know where to look for them. But yeah, they're not going to be super long. They're only 1 or 2 pages of questions. So I think somewhere between 5 and 10 written questions. So they're just meant to get you thinking about the topics in class, and writing out and showing your thought process so that we can get a feel for what you're understanding from the course. All right, next are our chapter quizzes. So there's going to be 23 quizzes total, which really means that each individual quiz is not worth very much of your final grade overall, because 23 quizzes are making up only 15%. So that's good. They're meant to be a low pressure way to make sure that you're keeping on top of the readings. So the chapter quizzes are going to be released concurrent with lectures, which is sort of the cleanest way that I could come up with saying, if I release a lecture video on Tuesday, I'm going to also release the chapter quiz for whatever chapter I was lecturing about at that same time, so on that same Tuesday. So this coming Thursday, when I release chapters 1, 2, and 3's lecture videos, I will also be releasing chapters 1, 2, and 3 chapter quizzes. And for both the lectures and the chapter quizzes, if I have them finished early, I will release them early. That's just sort of my absolute last point that I can release them, is in time for that day's classes. And the same kind of due date, where they're going to be due at 11:59 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, so midnight in Edmonton. And in this case, the chapter quizzes aren't going to be due sort of as they're released. They're not going to be due like 1 a week or anything like that. I've found that lots of deadlines can be really confusing, and we don't need that kind of confusion right now. So what I've done is I've clumped all of the quiz due dates to be due at the end of the day on the date of the midterm that's testing those chapters. So our first midterm is on February 9th, and it's covering chapters 1 through 8. So our chapters 1 through 8 quizzes are going to be due by midnight on February 9th. Like I said, they're going to release earlier, so 3 will release this week, 2 will release next week, and so on and so forth. So you'll be able to work through them as we go on, and I strongly encourage you to work on them as you go through those lecture videos. But if something comes up and you can't work on them this week, there's no real penalty for that as long as you get them done by the midterm date. So that's the logic behind this clustering of due dates here. And so then our next set of quizzes is due for the second midterm, so chapters 9 through 11 and 13 through 16. Those are due in time for our second midterm. So hopefully that arrangement works a little bit better. I've just had a couple of students struggling with forgetting individual dates, especially if we're going to be having 23 different quizzes. So do all at once in time with midterms and the last day of class. This one is actually the last day of class because I don't know when our final exam is quite yet. All right, and that brings us to our examination. So we're going to have 2 midterms and a final exam worth 20, 20, and 30% respectively. Our midterms are going to be set up and they are not cumulative, which basically means that they're only going to be covering untested material. So if I swap back here, that's saying that the first midterm covers chapters 1 through 8, and then you can kind of ignore that material for a bit until we get to the second midterm. You're going to go through the next set of chapters, and not having to know the first set of chapters. So only testing new material for the midterms. The tests themselves are going to include a mixture of short answer and multiple choice questions. So not just multiple choice, we're going to get you to do some thinking and evaluating and critical responses. And these examinations are going to be written on eClass. They're going to be open book. So I'm not going to have any kind of proctoring software. I find the fewer pieces of technology involved, the less likely things are to go wrong. So I'm going to go with open book and instead have a little bit of a tighter time constraint for the number of questions that there are, so you don't have time to look up every single answer. And I'm also going to try and ask questions that force you to think about the material. So you can't just look up every answer quick and easy. So I find that's a good balance. And like I said, the first midterm is on February 9th, second midterm March 16th. These are both Tuesdays, and they're going to be held during our normal class window, but they're only an hour long. So they're going to be written from 8 to 9 a.m., again, Mountain Standard Time. All right, for our final exam is actually cumulative. So I can test you on all of the topics we've covered throughout the course, but I will put more weight on untested material. So anything that we've learned after the second midterm is going to be more heavily weighted on the final, but I can still ask you questions that draw on stuff that was tested on the first and second midterms. And again, short answer and multiple choice questions, open book, written on eClass, no proctoring software. The final exam is basically just going to be a little bit longer of a midterm. And again, our date for the final exam is to be determined. The Office of the Registrar sets our exam dates. So at some point during the semester, they'll make an announcement so that we know when the exam date is. But until they make that call, I have no idea when the exam will be. You will at some point be able to see a tentative exam date in Bear Tracks. So it'll show when they think the exam is going to be, but that isn't necessarily set in stone. So just take that with a grain of salt. And that brings us to the end of our summarization of our syllabus. So that's most of the really important stuff. Make sure that you, again, still read through the syllabus. There is a lot more information there, lots of different policies and things like that. And you can also take a look at our eClass. Make sure that you know where stuff is at. Make sure that you can see where our announcements are and where I'm going to be posting lectures and stuff like that. So because there are no other proper our lectures today, take the time to familiarize yourself with the course and the site so that moving forward things hopefully go smoothly. But on that note, I will leave you here and I will talk to you guys on Thursday. Have a great day, everyone.